You.
You have no idea how long I've actually wanted to talk to you for. It's whenever you started, when you first started popping up in the newspaper with little articles and becoming quite the hot topic of debate amongst people, and you really are not shy to say what you think, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just don't know how to be otherwise. I've tried to get therapy and stuff, but yeah, it just comes out.
Everybody should have therapy at some point in their lives. Whether it works or not, it doesn't really matter, as long as you just go.
True.
Why was it, I'm going to just jump right in here and take you right back. Can you tell us about where you grew up? We were talking about it just now in the Cape Flats. Tell us about your folks.
Yeah, so I spoke at a synagogue the other day, and I told the people there, there's nobody more Jewish than I am, because my father was Abraham, my mother was Sarah, and my youngest brother was Isaac, and so my folks.
Abraham, Isaac, and Sarah.
Yeah, and my sisters know me, and my
Where
brother.
did Denzel come from then?
Well, Denzel, that's a good question. So Denzel, he's the youngest, but deceased, and my father worked for a madam in Rondebosch, and he was so impressed with his family that he named our youngest sibling after the madam's son, Denzel. To sort of break the trend. It turns out he was the most decent of the kids. So, I don't know what the moral of that
Denzel
story
was the most
is.
decent of the kids.
Yeah. Or the ones with the biblical names are hopeless, But they weren't supposed to be together. Abraham was English speaking from the Anglican Church. Sarah was Dutch Reformed, rural from, Afrikaans speaking. But somehow they meet, because my mother came to work at Brooklyn Chest in Milnerton and then got to meet people from the Evangelical Church, and so she meets my dad. So Abraham and Isaac, Abraham and Sarah, then became evangelical Christians, decided to name me Jonathan David as the eldest kid. And as I often say to church people, they go berserk when I say to them, it's actually the first gay couple in the Bible, Jonathan and David. Because the Bible says that the love of Jonathan for David was greater than the love of a man for a woman, 2 Samuel 2, verse 22. So, I mean, who knows, But I was born, and then in this very strict, evangelical environment to Sarah and Abraham, you couldn't, I often tell people I've never smoked in my life. I've never drunk wine in my life, and my kids are adopted.
Have you really never drunk in your life?
No.
No, I didn't think so.
I've never drunk. I don't know what wine tastes like.
Don't you?
No, because you remember in this very serious evangelical church community, wine is a mocker and strong drink is raging, and he who is deceived thereby is not wise, So, I mean, I grew up on these texts, So by the time I was old enough to drink wine, it just didn't taste. Still today, I try sometimes, but it's like horrible. I don't know if you tried it before. It tastes horrible.
It's funny, I don't drink either. Wine's fabulous for cooking with, but I don't know why people drink it like it's cold drink.
So because of this, dancing, for example, was out, right? So I'm embarrassed when I go out. I can't dance. I don't know how to do it because that was regarded as, a sin of the flesh and blah, blah, blah. So I come from a really crooked upbringing.
But have you moved away from that personally? I mean,
yeah.
Still...
No. I mean, once I, came to my senses, and let me also say this, I mean, being brought up in that kind of very strict regimen of, of the born-again community, there were huge benefits. One of the big benefits was, I didn't end up in trouble ever. I didn't go to prison. I didn't have parents who beat each other. I didn't have a father, so all of that stuff escaped me completely. And there was the value of, the value system that your parents put in you, which I'm very grateful for. But the downside of that is you were intolerant of people who didn't believe like you you know, and I'm embarrassed about that. But when I could, you know, as I said, make my own decisions, obviously, uh, um, a lot of the things just didn't appeal to me, and so I'm clumsy on the dance floor. I wish I could dance. I wish I could enjoy a wine and talk like my friends about, you know, where it comes from in the south of France and that kind of thing. I'm totally ignorant. But when we raised our two children, we kept the good part of that, you know, faith community, and we let them loose with regard to everything else. So my children don't have those hang-ups. My daughter's one of the best dancers I've ever seen in the world, you know, but they just don't have those hang-ups. But what we could take away from our parents, like just being a straight arrow person, tell the truth, you know, love your neighbor, and that kind of stuff, which is common to so many of our faiths, that they've got a healthy dose of, and they live. Right now, my daughter, just give an example. Right now, she just sent us a WhatsApp. She earns 100 Rand a week, okay, working as a volunteer for the Red Cross. And right now, she's in a truck with a lot of guys going to help in the flooding area in Strasbourg or someplace along the coast here. That's how we raise them, you know, to not live for yourself, but for others.
Which is very much what your book, Learning Lessons, is about. It's about giving back, putting back in, and the lessons you've taken from, you know, from the childhood, with going to school, right through your varsity education, overseas education. I have to tell you that I'm not an academic, and some of it was actually a little bit confusing for me. Like, I didn't even know what postgrads, undergrads, curriculums, and things like that. I mean, it was like, what is this? But when I was reading your book, and I must say I read it yesterday, which was absolutely a real treat for me, particularly when you were talking about school and attending school and pivotal moments in school. And for me, the one thing was having supportive teachers. And I think in that you were incredibly lucky. I mean, I remember a few dragons from when I was at school.
Well, you know, the thing is, you have good teachers and bad teachers. So in part of the book, I talk about the good teachers, the ones who would stop you in the middle of the playground and tell you, you're not doing as well as you can. You've got huge potential. You know, we old incomes. I mean, I had those teachers, but I also had, if you get deep into the book, I also had teachers who clobbered me for no reason
I read
whatsoever.
that. That's disgusting.
No, I mean, I remember it to this day, you know, and that had such a huge impact on me. And so the lesson I give to kids, including my own children, is listen, you're going to have good people in your life and you're going to have bad people in your life. And the trick is to learn from the good people, the positive lessons, and then the negative lessons from the bad people. But you're not a victim. You make your decisions, okay, based on that. So you're right, on the positive side of the ledger, I was like really lucky to have people in the faith community, people like my parents, you know, people. I mean, can I just tell you one story that's not in the book, which is so amazing? We have family in Port Elizabeth, and I was probably about 9, 10 years old. I don't know. When my family went for the school holidays, they took us to PE to my cousins. So we were playing in the street, you know, and playing soccer in the street. And suddenly the door of this simple house in Salsoniville, Bethelsdorp, opens, and out comes a whole lot of the church sisters, as they were called, you know, including my mother. And one of those sisters, I was a kid, and she comes to me and she says, I need to tell you something, that when you were still in the womb, when your mother was pregnant, we used to pray for you. I can't tell you how that threw me. Imagine there were people praying for you before you were born. And it was that unbelievable. It wasn't about the prayer. It wasn't about the Christian community. It was about the fact that there were adults in your life who actually cared about you before you arrived. And those kinds of things stick with you, you know.
And your grandparents?
Well, it's a mixed bag. My paternal grandfather, he was an alcoholic. So all I remember about him is that he drank himself to death. but he was incredibly funny. I think his last words on his deathbed was, "Have you heard this joke?" And then he expired. So I don't have much. So I don't have much of a memory of him except him being very funny. My paternal grandmother died when my father was a kid, so I never saw her. My grandparents on my mother's side, my grandfather had a huge impact on me. He was blind for much of his life, and there's a story in the family, apocryphal as it is, that he got blind the day they took his house. He had a beautiful house in a little farm away from him in Montague, in the Dorp, as they call it, and moved them into a small little location, for Black people. And shortly after that, he went blind. My aunts swear that it was an emotional blindness. I don't know. Could have been something else.
It's very possible. I mean, it's a really traumatic thing to have happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and they were comfortably middle class. They were actually, he was very respected even after the house was taken and given to white people. I remember walking with him because one of us always had to guide him to the shops and so on. And, he wore those hats the way old people used to do those days. And, when people passed by, he knew all of them, white and Black. And he would take off his hat with it as a woman, raise his hat. I mean, things like that you actually remember today. He was widely respected because he was so hardworking, so professional, so kind and generous in everything. Raised amazing. All his kids were either teachers or nurses, professional people those days, And so they, as I said, they were comfortably middle class, and just with that active disposition, we all went into like big time working class, and that stayed with us for generations. I think my generation is probably the first to come out of that kind of struggle, existence. But they were. He was amazing. My grandmother was like a cold fish. She. Her favorite words, I can't speak in, her favorite words, and she must have had about 30 grandchildren, and her favorite word was basta, which I learned later in life was a German Dutch word for stop it, basta. So I don't remember her ever hugging. I got one grandchild. She's in New Zealand, unfortunately, with my son and his wife. And I mean, I can't wait to just hug the kid, just to shower the kid with love and so on and so forth. My grandmother was like basta when she saw you,
Oh, that's very sad. But look how you turned out, so we don't have to worry about that.
Well, the good thing is, as I said, the good thing is, what do you do with what you've gone through, fortunately, I grew up intellectually, at least in the US, and with the Oprah culture where you hug anybody and everybody on sight, But there's a beauty about that. There's a beauty about, that is why I think this pandemic messes a lot of people up, because it messes teachers up, especially primary school teachers. You suddenly realize how a lot was taken for granted. Have you ever seen a primary teacher not hug a kid? It's what you do.
Yeah.
You see your children, you hug them. That's what we do. I'm sure many of the people on the screen do that automatically. And I think we're going to struggle coming out. Some of us are going to struggle coming out of this pandemic, because it's very hard not to have physical contact with people you love and care about.
Do you think that at some point we'll ever actually get out of this? I can't see things changing for at least the next 2 years.
Yeah, I interviewed Shabir Madi yesterday for a series. I'm doing an online series on leadership in crisis. And he's the continent's foremost vaccinologist. And he makes the point that you just did. It's going to take a very long time for us to eventually come out of this pandemic. And part of that is just the nature of the coronavirus, but part of it is the mismanagement of the pandemic, of the vaccines, total mismanagement, And you can have a lot of supply, but how do you get these vaccines to every South African in the 9 provinces, at speed, and that's not going to happen because we don't have three things. We don't have, first of all, the kind of public transport systems that enable us to do that. That's been thoroughly destroyed thanks to PRASA and others. We don't have the operational capacities. You actually need skilled people, people in logistics, people that can do this kind of work for you at pace. And we don't have the political will to make that difference. I mean, I don't know. I said in my column in the Times tomorrow, I said, I don't know if our Minister of Health gets excited in bed. I mean, he's got this bland face, this totally bland face. There's no urgency. There's no passion. It's like, so 50,000 people died. Let's talk about something else. I mean, I don't like this Boris Johnson. I think he's a total idiot. But what this guy does in the UK, he used to get up every day. He's flanked by his the head of health in the UK and other health experts. And they stand there and take questions from the public and questions from the BBC and, and the Independent and so on. And they speak to their people with a passion and with an urgency about their lives. Where the hell are our leaders, in this crisis? The one thing I learned as a leader is you got to be present in the crisis, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. You got to be there, and so on. Oh my God!
I can see this is a really hot topic for you.
No, I'm disturbed, because when I'm middle class. I live comfortably. I can Google stuff and so on. But imagine you're just only South African, and you're trying to just get by, and you've lost a relative and your government is nowhere to be found. They're at the Zondo Commission confessing to past crimes, and I feel for people who just don't get a fair shake out of this government when it comes to the most important existential crisis in the century, which is COVID-19.
Why are you not? Actually, well, let me ask you this way: what do you think of our Minister of Education?
Higher or basic?
Any.
Well, I think that. I think when it comes to the Minister of Basic Education, I think she has figured out that she can't change anything, right? And so the way to convince the public that you're doing something worthwhile is to bamboozle them. So every year she gets up, because there's nothing. I mean, we still have kids drowning in pit latrines, drowning in their own shit. I'm telling you this now. So what does she do? She waits for January and lies to the public and says, you know what? The school system is getting better. Look at the matric results. It's now gone up to 70, 80%. Okay. Do you know what? It's a bald-faced lie. Half the kids didn't make it from grade 2 to grade 12. We know that. There's a massive dropout in grade 10. We know that the kids are passing with 30 and 40% in those subjects. We know that if you took the kids out of Johannesburg, just take the kids out of that system, from the private school system or from the elite public school system, like Parktown boys and girls and so on and so forth, then the whole system collapses completely. So they're using the averages to tell you that everything is well, but it's not well. And in my culture, in my upbringing, your kid isn't doing well until everybody's kid does well. That's how I live my life. That's how I teach my children and my students. So, but I understand psychologically why she does that, because what else do you say? Do you tell the people, I don't even know this, that when they do these world comparative tests in science and math, do you know that we are dead last? Or we compete with countries like Guinea-Bissau. If you're competing with Guinea-Bissau, you're in serious trouble, whether it's soccer or mathematics. So the way of coping is to talk up the things that appear to represent progress, but in your heart of hearts is a load of nonsense, So in higher education, we've got the same problem. You've got 5 or 6 universities, at a stretch, 10 doing really well. The other 16 are not universities at all. I'm doing a book right now, and I decided to change the title of the book. And it's extensive research on dysfunctional universities in South Africa. The title of the book is The University as a Criminal Enterprise. you, you're the first to know that on this show.
Yeehaw! Come here more often, everybody, because we learn stuff here.
Let me tell you, you have no idea how many billions get lost. I'm documenting this in great detail in our public universities because it's become a place, a resource to rip off, you know. And so higher education is not doing well. It's the one thing we can do right, which is to give young people who make it a chance to get a decent degree, a decent job, pull their families out of poverty, etc. But instead, we're messing up the whole thing. So I'm one of those people who believe that Africa must have strong universities, that we don't have to follow the route of so many public universities on the continent. You know where the middle classes send their children on this continent. You go to places like Senegal, nobody sends their kids to the universities in Senegal. They send them to the UK, they send them to the USA, they send them all over, but not to their national universities. And I'm afraid, at the rate that we're going, more and more middle class people are also going to pull their kids out and pay £9,000 to the UK government and have the kids educated there. But we're in trouble, and the problem isn't the people. The problem is not the students. The problem is the leadership that we have. And when people see your national leadership in government fleecing the state on a daily basis, okay, every major SOE, state-owned enterprise, has collapsed dramatically. My sister depends on a train to get to work on the Cape Flats. There's no trains anymore. You go to Simonstown, where I as a kid used to jump on a train for cheap and then go and swim at Long Beach. There's no trains anymore. There's sea sand all over the rails, because of the massive mismanagement and corruption of the public rail system. So my point simply is that one way to get out of that rut is to use, is for your leadership to take. Do you know there's 2,000 schools in the Eastern Cape with pit latrines? Do you know how easy it is to fix that? Do you know how easy it is to fix that problem? Okay.
If you have the political will.
If you have the political will, and if you tell all the vultures in the supply chain, okay, cut the crap, and if you don't want to do it,
Pun intended.
will get private. Yeah, literally. Then we will get private contractors to do it. But we don't do that. We don't do that. We feed these parasites. And as a result, nothing gets done. And the only way we're going to change that, and we just jump to the end of the story, is for ordinary people, just like in the anti-apartheid struggle, ordinary people to get together and say, enough is enough, okay? We're going to take back our country now, and we are going to make it to work. I put in 18 hours a day, like many of you, because I believe in this country. I could very easily be sitting in California, my other home, and just enjoying the life, the intellectual life, the social life, and so on. But why? I was born here. I want to make a difference here. So my appeal to people wherever I speak, I do about 10, 15 talks a week, to people across the country is, let's find a way of getting together and pulling back from the brink. And I believe we can do that.
Why haven't you run for government, or why are you not the Minister of Education? I mean, you are way more qualified than anybody else I actually know personally.
Well, you'll be surprised how many good people there are in this country who could so easily lead, So this deployment thing of the ANC is a total disaster. And it's not just deployment, it's deploying the wrong people. There are many competent people in the ANC, I can tell you that. But they don't make it, you see. Because they don't play ball when it comes to corruption. That's one of the reasons. So the reason, I know my strengths, and one of my strengths, a few strengths, is I really believe that a democracy needs people on the outside of government that can raise, concerns, who can be a public nuisance, who use their skills to do analyses of public policy options and to sort of say, this is not being done well enough, this can be done better. I really believe it. And that's what I'm good at. I'm not good at being told what to do, at operating under a chief whip who tells you how to vote. I would be hopeless at that. I have a congenital disaffection for crowds, and for crowd behavior. So by the way, I think that's the same thing I would say of my friend Mampela Rampele. She should never have gone into politics. Never. Because her strength is her voice on the outside. She's extremely good. And when she tried to go into politics, she failed miserably, both
Yeah, it was a disaster.
in Ahang, but also in the DA. She's not that person. She's an independent, she's like Steve Biko. They are powerful intellects who you can't straitjacket in a government bureaucracy.
Where do you stand on the whole roads must fall, fees must fall, life must fall?
So I wrote a book about this called As by Fire. And on the one hand, I really do believe that education should be affordable and accessible for all our children. I believe that, okay? So I can understand the sentiment on the part of students who are saying, we want in, okay? And we're going to make our voices heard, and we will, come to your door, whether it's Pretoria, the Union Buildings, or the Vice Chancellor's office. I get that. That's what I would have done as well as a student. What I don't support, and never supported and never will support, is that you break down on a Friday what you need on a Monday. I don't get it. I don't get it. This destructiveness, and so on. So I said to UCT is probably very angry with me right now, everybody was crying long tears, the liberal classes, long tears. Oh, the fire wiped out the Jagger reading room. Yeah, I also cried. But where were your tears when those students pulled the artworks, out of the building and burnt them, 19 artworks, including works honoring Mandi Blackburn and others? Where were your tears? You were too scared to raise your voice because it wasn't a natural disaster. It was, students, and you're too scared of the students. Where were the national tears when they burned down one of the UKZN law libraries, okay, that had artifacts there from 100 years ago? So for me, the destruction doesn't make any sense. The anger does make sense. The demand for free higher education for the poor makes a lot of sense. The destruction that comes with it is something uniquely South African. I haven't seen. I worked in Zimbabwe doing my doctoral fieldwork there. I never once saw people burning down the University of Zimbabwe or its public libraries. Not once. Because they value education. And so there's something that's gone wrong within our national psyche so same with Rose Must Fall. I really do believe we need more African texts. We need more African, poets, philosophers, curriculum theorists, my field, etc. All of that is true, But I don't believe you do that in a way that is exclusive. I still want my kids to read Plato and Aristotle. I still want my kids to read, obviously, Fanon and Amy Césaire. I want them to have a global education, but not this narrow nativist understanding of education, that says it's one or the other, And so there's a lot of silliness, which itself reflects a poor education on the part of some of our activists, that doesn't understand. On the one hand, again, you want a culturally, politically, socially, geographically more inclusive education. I've struggled for that all my life. But you don't do that in a way that goes back into yourself, as an African or a South African and so on. That makes no sense to me at all.
For me, one of the problems is with the youth of today, or going even back 20 years, is that people think they're entitled to a university education. Whereas I personally, I don't know anybody else stands on this issue, but I personally believe that primary and secondary education should be top notch and free. So that when you finish school, you can actually go out into the world as a person who can do something, who doesn't need a varsity education. And if you are going to have a varsity education, by all means, make it expensive and pay it off, or get a bursary or earn that bursary. And it's just not right for me that, that primary and secondary education is a disaster.
Yeah, no, look, I'd go even further back, Mandy, than you do and say, if you really want to build a strong school system or education system, make massive investments in early childhood education, because that's where the gap opens up. The gap opens up between the kids who went to a really good preschool education and those who didn't. And the research of my colleague Nick Spall shows that you never make up that gap over the 12 years of schooling. So you're quite correct. But, preschool kids can't burn down things, preschool kids can't jump over the gates of parliament, and make a noise. And so we put disproportionately so much money into higher education with relatively low returns when we could have, as you correctly said, really built a strong school system. I do believe, though, that if poor kids want to go to university and they need a hand up, we should provide for that. But we've entered a culture now. In my book, As by Fire, I talk about the university as a welfare system where everybody expects to be paid. Not only will we give you tuition and accommodation, we will give you books and an allowance, a living allowance. What the hell is that? So that, even that doesn't bother me that much, but it comes with an understanding that the state is there to take care of me as a 20-year-old, and I don't buy that. I had to work like many of you did, uh, and I had to pay back my bursary, and I had to work after school. I worked in the school holidays as a postman's assistant in Fishhook and that kind of thing, so that my parents understood, that part of learning is learning how to live within your circumstances and so on and so forth. So I agree with you. I just think just giving left, right, and center builds a very bad attitude in a system that's already very heavily indebted through the welfare system.
Why did you feel it was necessary to write a memoir about learning lessons at this point?
Man, one of the main reasons was, well, there are two reasons actually. The one I write about in the book, and that was often when I speak, whether it is at St. Stithians in Johannesburg or Township School Oskampeta in Nyanga, I get kids coming to me afterwards, or university students, and they say to me, Professor, you've been successful. What is the secret? What can I learn from you? I've done okay, but I don't know if I. But I said to the kids, okay, simple things like you see in the book. Like one of the things is you must show up. I don't care what your circumstances are, but if you get an opportunity, if you get your first job, you come in earlier than everybody, you leave later than everybody else, and you work like you mean it. So simple things like that, I would say, but I never had a chance to put it all together. So I thought, okay, here's 10 lessons I want to share with these kids. And so any student can pick it up, and hopefully learn from that. And so that was the immediate reason. But there was another reason. I was writing some very serious academic and theoretical books last year when the pandemic broke. And I was halfway through one of these books, which is really interesting. Well, for me, it was intellectually very interesting. And then I realized, why are you doing this? Okay. Why didn't you also write a book for the general public? So we did two books immediately. One was Learning Lessons, which I'm glad that you are airing tonight. And another was Learning Under Lockdown, where we asked 400 kids to send us their stories, and we put it in. And that book is in CNA right now, going for very cheap. And so that the children could read their own stories about learning from home and the highs and the lows of that. Right now, the teachers came to us and said, can we get a book on teaching under lockdown? So that book will go to the press on Friday. And so teachers will have something. So, and then we're doing one on parents, because parents,
And alcohol. Is there like parents and alcohol section?
There's the parents and alcohol. That's coming, But so you have a trilogy: teaching, learning, parenting. In other words, for me, the lockdown was an opportunity not just to write for a relatively elite group of, eggheads in the academy, but to also do something that the general public can enjoy and reflect on, and especially kids in school.
One thing I noticed when I was reading your book is that your wife is neglected. I mean, if you are working 18 hours a day, what was she left to do? I mean, the poor woman.
Well, first of all, she runs her own business. So she is an executive coach. She just finished a master's degree and opened her own business. And so she works with women who are, working, have children to take care of, and studying at the same time. So she's developed a model for how to support women through coaching. And so she's got her own busyness, but we're quite good at blocking out time. So, for example, 2 weekends ago, we just said we're going away for 4 days, just on the spur of the moment. And we hired a house up there in Boulders and looked out on the sea and did nothing, except take books to read and so on. So we sort of developed the rhythms, in which you work very hard, but you take time out and do fun things. And so, which of course your body needs and your spirit needs, otherwise you can be quite destructive if you don't stop.
If you have any questions for Professor Jansen, won't you please pop them in the chat box and I'll relay them to you. The first question, Prof, is, do you think that discipline is broken down? Are kids being taught right and wrong in their own homes?
I don't think so. And I think that's right. I think the discipline is a huge problem, and particularly among boys. One of the problems we have with boys, if you look at all these student protests, it's mainly young men, here and there women, but mainly young men. And one of the problems that the things they would have taught is a simple thing in a home, like impulse control. One of the things that dads, especially, do well with boys raising them is to teach them not to, explode when there's a problem. And if you don't get taught that, you are constantly in the. Then the second thing is, I don't believe you can teach values as in put it in the curriculum. That is doesn't work. But what you can do is to live those values in a way that persuades children. So we've never laid our hands on our kids. But I can tell you now, Mandi, if my 2 children came in here now without me having to say a word, and we were in one room, they would say, "Hello, Auntie Mandi," and they'd go to Mel and says, "We wish you well on your upcoming wedding." In other words, they have learned certain routines, okay, since the day they were born, that my kids honestly struggle with people who struggle with it. They can't understand the race. They don't understand racism. They have my son ran up with a white woman, which initially upset me, but I'll tell you about that some other time. And
you can't do that and then say I'll come back to that some other time. When are we having that little conversation?
And I will have it right now. And my daughter believed the only men worth loving are Black African men. They make their choices not on the basis of what you believe or what you look like, or they just don't understand South Africa's obsession with these kinds of with race and gender and all of that stuff, So, and that's because when they woke up, in our house, they saw everybody, always. On a Friday night, we take them to Shabbat with the Suranskis or Sanajus. Very often, we would take them to our Muslim friends and we'd have celebrate Eid together. This is now children who come out of straightforward Protestant evangelical kind of backgrounds. Many of our friends they noticed were gay people whom we love dearly. So they didn't grow up, in spaces other than the ones that I'm describing to you. So when you do those kinds of things, and if you raise your children in those kinds of homes, xenophobia drives them nuts. They don't understand it. How can you not love your neighbor from Zimbabwe or Mozambique and so on and so forth? Because these are our friends, etc. So, I think the disciplinary problems often arise because the example of the parents, not always, but very often, is not one that the kids can learn from. And if that happens, your children will always be playing defense.
Okay, Bill, this is not a question, it's a statement. I want questions, please. Okay, how many of South Africa's problems result from the compulsion to change things after 1994?
Look, we had to change things. I mean, there's no question about it. How we went about it, I think, was often not in the best way. So the one thing that we spoke about earlier was just also corruption in the state, and that caused huge damage. in other ways, we were ruthless, and I have said in my book, Knowledge in the Blood, there must be other ways in which to make all of us feel that we have a role to play in South Africa's future, and so on. So, but we had a very ruthless employment equity regime, which I think very often was applied, as much as I support it in principle, it was often applied in ways that said Black people are welcome, white people are not welcome, colored people to some extent, Indian people to a lesser extent. You can't play that kind of game with young people's lives. And so I believe you can win on both counts. You can win by making more opportunities available to all our people, particularly those who, were disadvantaged in the past. But do it, and let me just give you a practical example of this instead of being too theoretical. I remember Rampela saying one day, why are you trying at UCT to get rid of the white lecturers? You got people like George Ellis, one of the world's most famous cosmologists and mathematicians. Instead of trying to get him out, say, George, come in here. And we're going to give you a diverse group of, 100 really talented young Black and other mathematics students. Teach them how to become like you and better than you. In other words, we don't use those skills, to build better for all our children. We, in fact, castigate people, chase them away, call them names, and so on and so forth. And I find that to be unnecessary and unproductive if we're going to build a unified nation. The only way we're going to get out of the mess we're in is if every South African feels that they have a stake in the reconstruction of our country.
Does the removal of so-called colonial text worry you?
Yes and no. So I think if it's just colonial text for the sake of the old colonial text, I have, then I have a problem with that. We're now in a situation where for example, if I wanted to teach you about, the Central African colonial period through the eyes of, some fairly nasty racist writers, I would want to use those texts, okay, as illustrative. I want to use those texts to point out how people saw the world in that day in order for you to be able to critique those forms of knowledge. I really can't imagine teaching the classics without drawing on some of those earlier colonial and pre-colonial texts, actually, that I think give insights into the thinking of people at various points in history. So this notion of a pure text, that has been, in which you've eradicated everything you don't like, is not education. That's indoctrination. And so I would rather use a range of, as I do, by the way, in my classes, a range of different texts. But I give you the skills in which to assess those texts and their value and their perspectives and their meaning in a particular epoch. That for me is the kind of education, but it's gone crazy, the world has gone crazy. You saw what happened to my friend Adam Abibe, the School for Oriental and African Studies. He's just been reinstated today, by the way, as of the 10th of May. But it was completely unnecessary. He's using the N-word to illustrate that he's going to take action against people who do that. Oh my word, they suspend the guy, embarrass him, humiliate him. And I told him up front, I said, Adam, if the board reinstates you, you have to ask yourself whether you want to stay, because I don't trust them. Okay? It's two decisions here, whether they reinstate him, which they just did, by the way, and his decision whether he wants to work with a board that doesn't have his back. And if you look at the context of the use of that, so there is a madness, and I don't want to use terms like the silly book by Helen Ziller on woke culture. I don't think she understands.
Oh, it's my pet peeve, woke culture.
Yeah, and political correctness. People use that in a lazy way, and so I'm avoiding using those terms. But you know what I mean is if we can't talk about anything, especially in the context of a democracy and the context of our education, then I think we should just shut down these things and send people to churches, synagogues, and mosques.
Okay, now why do we want nuns to teach people?
Well,
You know how scary they are.
I know. They beat the hell literally out of some of my friends. Listen, the reason Zimbabwe has such outstanding schools is because their schools, most of the schools are run by the Protestants, by the Anglicans and Catholics. And if you look at the really top schools, black schools in South Africa, pre-1994, schools like Little Flower in the Natal Midlands, as it was called, these were all places run by nuns. Where I grew up in the retreat in Steenberg, if you went to St. Mary's, you had a 10, 15, 20% advantage of the kids who went to, the ordinary public schools. So I have there's something about the discipline, the culture, the commitment of people in the faith-based churches that is something to behold, and I've seen that for all faith-based churches, schools, sorry. So I use the nuns very often because of the knowledge that I had. But no, listen, they were not always kind and generous and lazy.
No, they're actually quite scary nuns.
Yes.
I love the bit in your book when you have in make things happen when they do not, and with the instant karma, you're being, over my dead body, you'll get that job, and then a couple of weeks later, the guy drops dead.
Yeah.
That was absolutely fantastic.
Well, not his death, hopefully, but the thing is, I've seen this in life as I've seen it in education. People sort of expect things to come to them. You expect the bursary to knock on your door. You expect the opportunity to study abroad, to visit you in a dream. That's not how life works, So the people who are successful will knock on 100 doors and one door opens and they're in, And so the lesson I suppose I wanted to teach as students is are you sending out those 100 CVs? Are you calling 200 people? Are you making yourself visible in the workplace so that people can't miss you? Because if you're not, I give young people jobs all the time to see if they're worth anything. And I tell you, they work like crazy for 2 weeks and then they're late with an assignment or they're half-hearted with a project. And I say to myself, you're never going to be successful, because you haven't learned how to show up.
How did you choose those 10 lessons to put in the book?
Well, yeah, so I'm a bit of, I spend a lot of time observing things. So if, I go to a restaurant or meal with a friend or family, I spend quite a lot of time looking at people's behavior and seeing what happens, And so over the years, I've sort of figured out by watching young people in particular, who are the ones who make it and who are the ones who don't. And I would keep a mental note to myself, the reason Samantha Williams of this actual kid from Lavendale who can't go out at night because of the gangs in Lavendale, the reason she got the first student to get her LLB cum laude from the Free State, the reason she's made it big, is because she had the quality of being so determined that nothing would stop her from, becoming a top student, an articled clerk, and all of that stuff. So I keep a note of those things. And then, of course, biographically, I say to myself, I'm not wonderful. I've made a lot of mistakes, as you see in the book. But I would sort of say to myself, now, what did you learn from this? Okay. I failed my first year in university. It was devastating for me, and I could blame everybody else. But what did I learn from it? And so it's a mixture of my own life lessons and what I've observed in young people around the country and indeed around the world.
Do you think, hang on, I just lost the question now. Something about the quote. Do you think the current quota split is fair? I see the hopelessness in our white teenage boys. The message is that there is a loss of hope. And for the future is a concern. Did that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah, oh my goodness. Where you see this most, where it's very, very intense is with medical school applications, and you have universities that say we don't take white students, which I think is so ridiculous. And there's others that have very strict quotas and so on and so forth. When UCT didn't take the top student at Berkeley High School into medicine, she had 96%. I called the family from the Free State. I said, we will take her in. So you got to balance out, and it is a balancing act, politically and otherwise, between opening up more opportunities for those who would never have gotten into medicine at, at the University of the Free State, for example, versus recognizing those who've really done well. And I think, this is that's the wisdom of Solomon that I think we don't exercise in the political domain is how do you make everybody feel that the place belongs to them and they each have a shot at life and so on and so forth. And we took that student in, white girl, and she graduated and she's working as a doctor, and I'm delighted we could do that. So I don't think we see enough of that. I mean, you look at the cabinet of the country, dominated, 80, 85, 90% Black African folk. I understand how that happens historically. But what message are you sending out to people when you are so lacking in generosity? So when I chose my senior executive team as University Vice Chancellor, most of them were women. They were all Black, white, every color. They were gays and straight. They were, Hindu and Christian. In other words, you made an effort to make sure that when the students looked at that list, they saw the things that you talk about in practice. And this should be true for all of us, whether it's the business that you run, whether it's the school that you manage, whether it's the university that you lead. In all of these contexts, we have a responsibility, government especially, to make sure that everybody feels that the country belongs to them. And if you lose that sense, then, and this is why I like Joe Biden so much. Donald Trump made it very clear this place is for white people and white men in particular. Oh my God, what a disaster he was and is. And Joe Biden said, this is for all of us. And you look at his cabinet, he's appointed more women than any president in the history of the United States into the cabinet. That's the kind of country that I would like us to become, and not one that makes these hurtful choices between white and Black or Christian or Muslim or whatever the case may be.
Here's a really big question for you. How do you see the near future of education in this country?
I've got bad news for you. It's not going to get better. Okay. Now, a lot of us work in the NPO sector. A lot of us work in philanthropy, working with schools, and so on. And that's good, because if you take away the voluntary sector in South Africa, this country collapses tomorrow morning. That I can tell you. However, to change a country with 26,000 schools, you need a government, unfortunately. You need a leadership at the top, because the problem is systemic. It isn't just the 20 schools that I work with, in Kalicha, etc. So you're quite right. It is a question to be asked, but the answer is, you see, one of the questions that we posed in a different book we just published last year is, why is it that our majority of our schools are so neglected? And we came to the conclusion, the book is called Who Gets In and Why, a UCT Press. And we came to the conclusion that the reason is all the government cabinet ministers, every civil servant has their kids in the fancy schools. And while their kids are there, they don't care damn what happens to the kids, okay, in the majority of the schools. So if you at a school like St. Cyprian's in Cape Town, or you're at school in Bishops, or you're at a school, these fancy schools around the country, your children had a seamless transition from face-to-face education to online learning. Seamless, okay? And I love it for those kids. Do you know how many kids in our country didn't even have WhatsApp to download notes from the school? They lost touch with it. So for 3.5 months, they had no active education. We are going to see the results of that in decades to come, And so I've also begun to change my mind, because I was initially quite against the reopening of the schools too early, until all the mitigating measures were in place, especially in the poorer schools. But now I'm beginning to see that the real damage of extended even of this staggered approach to return to schools, the real damage is going to be with us for a very long time to come. I don't know much, Mandi. I'm actually very slow. I'm a slow learner. I pretend I know things, but I actually don't. But there's one thing I do know for sure. If a country doesn't get its education right, everything else goes wrong. The economy goes wrong. Moral, decency goes wrong. Capacity to help others goes wrong. If you don't build a strong education system, you don't have to wait for ESCOM to put out the lights.
Do you not believe, though, that the whole education system should be overhauled? I mean, kids today, let's say the more affluent, I can't answer for people who aren't, but most 3-year-olds have a cell phone in their hands and they play with them. So they're actually growing up faster, being educated faster than kids, in centuries before. Should the whole education system not be overhauled?
I absolutely agree with you. So the first thing I would do if I was your Minister of Education is I would sort of say, let's completely dump the current curriculum called CAPS. Let's just dump it completely and let's start anew. So first of all, let's take account of the fact that the future of education is hybrid as far as teaching is concerned. It is online as far as kids is concerned, and to a larger extent, and therefore technology has to play a major role in the way we rethink the infrastructure of a school, the preparation of teachers. I chair the board of the Jakes Cavell Fellowship. We hire the smartest young people in the country and we train them to become teachers. And you know what? We're the first outfit in the world to make digital pedagogy an official part of the teacher education program in the country. That's what I mean by what I hope you mean by overall.
That's exactly what I mean by overall.
But don't try and microwave the existing system and hope for a better outcome. It's not going to happen, And then, of course, I would simply, shut down half of the universities, build a whole lot of technical colleges, and make sure they are equipped with the right kinds of skills as far as teachers are concerned, and the right kinds of machinery, so that our children can actually get, as you said earlier, just get good jobs, that they make for themselves. But this notion of pushing everybody into academic universities is just a joke.
I mean, at my age, if there's something I want to learn, I look for it on YouTube. I learned Kakwami from YouTube.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have learned that, I mean, I'm learning now a lot of new things myself just by you. But even that is a skill, right? You can't just do
it is a skill, yeah. But even navigating Facebook today is a skill. I mean, people who come into Facebook now who weren't at Facebook when it started don't know how to find the things or how to evolve with it. I mean, it's mind-boggling, Facebook at times.
But even this platform we're on right now called Zoom, do you know how almost all of us are underutilizing all of the features because we haven't taken time to learn all of the features that can make it so even more exciting, as a platform. And then it changes every other month, as you know, and so on. So yeah, I mean, I like your common sense approach, Mandi, to education and training, and that should be the basis for, but, unfortunately, institutions don't learn, they just don't learn. I mean, the Catholic Church, is still, I mean, in this day and age,
At least they don't burn people anymore.
As far as you know, but you're right. But, I mean, this stupidity around, abortion and all of that stuff that just puts people into a hole, and so on. So yeah, institutions don't learn, unfortunately. Even with this pandemic, there's a lovely book called Plague, Pox and Pandemics by a friend of mine called Howard Phillips. He's a retired professor at UCT. And the biggest lesson from the 1918 flu, the so-called Spanish flu, is actually from Kansas, by the way. Somebody should tell Donald Trump. But the biggest lesson from that pandemic is we don't learn from pandemics, And so you'll see when we reset after COVID-19, people go back to the same bad habits, for the most part. The only thing we can be grateful for is our scientists are discovering, as you know, new remedies, therapies, but also vaccines that can keep us healthy. But human behavior doesn't change easily, despite calamity.
Well, I'm glad I've been brushing up on my Walking Dead, because I know what's coming with the post-apocalyptic times. So as you can see in the last hour, we haven't actually even got to all the the markers in the book. Why can't you be Minister of Education? Is it because you're not in the ANC? But I think you answered that earlier. You'd rather work from the outside than the inside.
No, well, that's as far as personal choice is concerned. But the person also, whoever else, makes a good point. The way you get into, government, into a cabinet is 99% of the time, it's because you're loyal to the party and you're a party member and you have something clear. So the person is right. I don't belong to any party. I don't, I don't follow anyone. And that is not good if you want, in the ANC anyway, to get. There used to be, I don't know if you remember this, Mandi, but there used to be a time there was a percentage of people in your cabinet who didn't belong to any political party, who were actually appointed for their skills. Do you remember a guy called Derek Keys, for example?
Yeah.
Who was Minister of Finance at one point. I mean, he was not a party animal, but he was hired. And so I think a government that is smart won't just hire people because of political loyalties, but also because they actually bring real skills to different layers of government.
Do you think there's an element of the government not putting money in and focus on education because it pays you to keep your populace dumb?
I don't think so. They actually do put a lot of money into education. The problem is not a lack of money. Both as a percentage of GDP, but also as a percentage of the national budget, we probably spend more than any other African country apart from Botswana, but we still get the worst results. So the problem, as Trevor Manuel used to say correctly, is not money. The problem is efficiency. How do you turn the resources into results? And that's where all this other stuff happens, the unionization of teachers that has become destructive, the corruption within the supply chain for simple things like textbooks, PPE for schools, blah, blah, blah. So, and all of that. So resources, fine. Results, weak. It's that link that that fails us.
I want to say, you were talking about in your book about being critiqued by your fellow academics. And I loved this book about, I was on a sharp learning curve that day in Pittsburgh. Good academics can critically engage their colleagues on academic work and have a beer afterwards. In South Africa, academic criticism can make you lifelong enemies. Egos are fragile and a critical comment can be taken personally. I just want you to know that it's exactly the same with fiction writers in this country. I get a lot of books to read and then I can decide. I'm very fortunate that I can sometimes cherry pick who I want to talk to. And I try my hardest not to bring anybody on whose book that I haven't enjoyed. And you don't find because it's such a small community, nobody turns around and says, gee, I found your book was really shit. They just don't do it, and you could have, delved deeper into that. You could have. So it's not just amongst academics in South Africa. It's a general sort of malaise about being honest about how you feel. There's one book doing the rounds now. It's gone into its second reprint. I'm not going to name it because I don't feel like getting lynched at this point. But I thought the book was shit. It was dreadful. Maybe I'm just stupid. Just did not get it. And there's not one bad review about this book. So I can't believe I'm the only one who didn't enjoy it. I really don't.
No, yeah. No, I appreciate that point.
And then the one thing that I really, really, really loved is the point that you put across. And I think I'm going to end you because we've been talking for more than an hour, and I'm sure that you have other things that you'd like to be doing, like writing another book. How many books have you got out already?
I absolutely don't know. I haven't taken time to count.
I'm going to check that and come back to everybody because I think you're absolutely amazing. I don't know where you find time to work as well. So
well,
you were asked.
do you know my joke about that? Eh?
No.
And so every now and again at the book launch, somebody gets up in the audience and says, Professor Jansen, I just have one question for you. Where do you find the time to write all these books? And then I say, I only love two things in life: eating and writing. And nobody has ever asked me where I find the time to eat.
You can eat when you write it. This is the one comment that I absolutely loved, and you reiterated further down in the book as well. But a student said to you, "How do you manage peer pressure?" And you replied, "You choose the right peers." And clearly you have chosen the right peers in your march towards higher education.
You know, I still remember the kid who asked that. I remember where it took place as well. And she's now a famous optometrist. But no, look, the thing is, you know, the company you keep is everything. They're either going to take you down or pull you up. And I've always sort of learned that I must be in the presence of people who are better than me, who are smarter than me, because I want to emulate them. I want to compete with them. I want to learn from them. I want to enjoy their smartness or their, you know. So I play the jazz piano, for example, you know, and I can't tell you, the moment I'm in the company of people who are really good jazz players, I just sit, because a lot of that is playing by ear, you know. And
that's how you learned the piano.
That's how I learned the piano. You listen to the best. You hang out with the best. That's true in the academic world. You will go nowhere.
How is Lenny, by the way?
Lenny's great. He's a professor, you know, at University of Pretoria. He's the guy that just so much better than me, so much smarter. And the other day he called me up and he said, "I'm visiting in Cape Town. You know, let's just hang out and what." Those are the kind of people, you know, that I think would make it. But if you with doomsayers all the time, if you're with people, you know, who want to get up to no good, if you're a young person, if you're with people who have no ambition in life, you unfortunately become like them.
No, you do. Professor Jansen, I can't thank you enough. It's been an absolute treat chatting to you this evening. Everybody, the book is called Learning Lessons by Jonathan Jansen. You left out one comment at the back because chapter 10 is called Keep Your Feet on the Ground, but you never mentioned and reach for the stars. So clearly you didn't have Pop Shop in your youth.
Thank you, Mandi, so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the privilege from Gilda. Absolutely wonderful talk. Thank you from Susan. And Professor Jansen, everything of the best. Keep writing, keep teaching, and go from strength to strength. And maybe you can do something about the education in this country. We have hope.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Jen, and everybody else.
Good night, everyone. Have a fantastic evening. Bye, all.